This is a video of the athlete performing an overhead squat. He adopts a slightly narrow stance to begin with, and as he begins his descent, there are a few occasions where the athlete actually deviates from neutral, and the knees begin to fall into valgus. And he almost adopts this wobble pattern as he goes through, so where you see on a few occasions where the knees actually dive inside and outside of the red line as he goes through that descent. We can also see that hips and knees sit inside the feet, which are externally rotated. So as we begin to deconstruct the movements, we first look at the ankle dorsiflexion, in which the athlete possesses a respectable 10 or 11 centimetres, with an optimal range recommended to be in and around 10 to 14 centimetres. Again, in the shoulder flexion test, the athlete is now able to maintain a neutral spine and keep his back flat, head in contact with the wall, and also make contact with the wall with no excessive rib flare present. The athlete demonstrates good ribcage depression, a nice spinal flexion, and is able to shift his weight right back. So both knee and hip flexion are good. And then we move into the scour test to try to obtain his optimal squat width and stance. Because the athlete didn't appear to have any physical capacity issues, it was then deemed that the next step would be to treat this as a skill issue and a motor learning issue. The introduction of miniband was used just to try and cue a little bit more glute activation and external rotation of the hips, trying to develop some awareness of the hips and cueing him to exhale fully, bring the pelvis and ribcage together. We also looked at psoas marches, trying to keep the lower back in neutral, and cat-camel exercises to give the athlete awareness. Now we can begin to replicate the demands and provide him with context by performing a quadruped rock back drill, focusing on bracing a lumbar-pelvic relationship, whilst replicating the demands of the squat. Now he has an understanding of how the bracing sequence should feel. We were able to use the newfound control and movement in a more functional pattern, reassuring the brain and body that it's safe to maintain these newfound movements. Here's a video of another athlete performing the overhead squat. As the athlete commences the squat, you can see his right foot is already externally rotated. As the athlete goes into the descent, you can see that he adopts a very hip dominant strategy and a very excessive forward lean. It would appear that the weight is right back over his heels, and you can almost see his toes lift and that very excessive arch in the foot. As we look at this now from a side view, you can see again, as we confirmed in the first video, that very excessive forward lean, and the shin almost stays vertical throughout the movement, forcing the athlete to really sit back, and again that would force the weight back into his heels. Quite often these issues are associated with ankle dorsiflexion, and this athlete only possesses 4 centimeters on his left and 2 centimeters on his right, which would be real causes for concern. The impact of this issue can actually be highlighted even further through the use of a heels elevated overhead squat, in which the athlete is actually able to hit well below parallel. Possible interventions would include soft tissue work, band distraction, and the initial setup is pretty good. As you can see, the brace is on, the chin is tucked, and he managed to maintain a neutral spine throughout the descent. However, as he goes into the descent, the hips come down rather than up. So we actually see the hips drop. Ideally we're looking for the hips to drag back, and then there's just a little bit too much knee flexion there. And as we get to the bottom of the lift, the bar begins to move forward away from the body. With the introduction of load, the squat pattern is further emphasised, and as the bar moves below the knees, there is now lumbar extension in order to increase the range of motion and shift the centre of mass back towards the heels. So we're still seeing that squat pattern now. As the bar moves further away from the body, we start to see a little bit more lumbar extension. This may suggest a potential quad dominant athlete with weak underactive anterior core, a restriction in lumbar pelvic and a hamstring control. The athlete is scoring around 60 for both legs on the active straight leg raise. The baseline figure has been identified as around 70 plus to perform an optimal RDL. This was again supported by the standing toe touch test, in which it demonstrated reduced rib cage depression and also reduced spinal flexion. So we see a relatively straight lumbar spine and then an excessive curve just over the thoracic, and also we can see an inability to really kind of drive the hips back and shift the weight back into the hip. So the chosen intervention focused on the active straight leg raise and leg lowering drills. So we went through the leg lowering sequence in which we had the band leg lower with a 5-second exhale focused on trying to keep the pelvis low, a hemi bridge 90-90 breathing, and also some PNF stretching as well. So within a 10-minute intervention block, the athlete managed to increase the active straight leg raise by around 10 degrees. So the result is it's now able to maintain neutral spine and focus on driving the hips back towards the wall. However, the bar still just slightly forward, but the initial focus was just on improving that relationship within the hips. So as you can see, the athlete now actually maintains a much better posture. His hips are higher. The bar again is still slightly forward, but we're just focusing on the hips compared to that first RDL where you can see a much greater knee flexion. The movement is first initiated through the knees. Once the athlete exhausts ankle range, then we start to see the hips drop into almost a squat pattern. From there, the athlete is unable to get his body over the bar, and then what we start to see is this slight bend and flex in the arms. And as we pull through, again we see a slight bend in the arm and almost. It's clear that the athlete lacks any real intent, and it's not a natural movement which requires considerable thought in order to complete the movement. This can be seen in the next video, where the movement is broken down into 3 clear phases. The band was introduced to encourage him to pull the bar into his lats and to change the focus from trying to keep his arms locked while also hitting the coaching points identified earlier. However, this actually seemed to emphasise the issues within the bar. Again, we see the movement initiated in the knees and then the hips drop down. As we can see again, we see that elbow flex again and lock out. As the athlete comes up, again we see a side flex as he attempts to pull his scapula and push his chest through and reset. We then look to regress the movement further through changing the environmental constraints of the exercise, looking at 2 clear points, hips up and back and arms straight. The band was used as a reference point to the athlete to provide him with an external feedback in allowing the band to pull his hips back while maintaining a high hip position. To reduce the demands even further, we adopted a bottoms-up approach, giving the athlete the perception that the range of motion had been reduced. We can clearly see that the perceptual demands of the task have been reduced for the athlete, and is able to hit a much nicer position with his hips back, nice smooth control, lift and squeeze, and even in the descent, again initiating the movement with his hips back, really nice control, and then finishing with that chest almost parallel to the floor. Is it ever just one or the other? I think that when working with athletes, both skills and capacity issues become merged and interchangeable dependent upon any given situation. We will never be truly able to fix an athlete, as there are far too many variables, in which case I believe the role of assessing the athlete should be an ongoing process and a case of identifying the big rocks and form there. It's a case of trial and error. If it improves them, continue, and if not, well then we need to go again, find something else and then try to improve that.